the grocery store, my daughter tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, can we get the cookies for Daddy again? The ones Grandma always buys him? My hand tightened on the shopping cart. What cookies, baby? The ones from last Tuesday when Grandma took me to see Daddy at his new house. Nora reached for the package. He said they're his favorites. Mom, my voice came out deadly calm. What house? She's confused, Mom said quickly. Too quickly. You know how kids mix things up. The secret house? Nora interrupted. Oh, I know. The one Daddy lives in. Yay! My knees almost buckled. How many times, Mom? She looked at the floor, then the ceiling. Anywhere but at me. It's not what you think. How many times? Every Tuesday, Nora answered innocently. After lunch, Grandma says you're too tired from work to know. Tuesday. Everything started to click. Nora's anxiety attacks always peaked on Wednesdays. The bedwetting started on a Wednesday. The nightmares that made her claw at her sheets, screaming for me. The realization hit like ice water. Her therapist said the mental health regression started 6 months ago. Mom's hands shook on the cart handle. A girl needs her father. He broke my jaw. The words exploded out of me. Other shoppers turned to stare. I didn't care. I ate through a straw for 2 months. You drove me to the hospital. You saw the x-rays. Nora's eyes went wide. She'd never heard this story. He's changed, Mom whispered. He goes to church now. He showed me. The bruises on her legs. My voice cracked. 3 months ago. She said she fell at the playground. I grabbed Mom's wrist tight. But there's no playground, is there? She yanked away. He would never. You said that about me too. I was screaming now. Security was walking over. When I showed up at your door bleeding, when I begged you to help me leave, you said I was being dramatic. Said I should try harder. Nora started crying. I knelt down, forcing my voice to sound gentle. Baby, has Daddy ever given you medicine? Special vitamins? She nodded. The sleepy juice. When I get scared. He says it helps me relax. Bile rose in my throat. Mom's face went gray. You're doing it again. My voice was barely a whisper. The same thing you did to me. You let him drug her to keep her quiet. It's just Benadryl. It's just drugging my child. I thought about every Tuesday. Always coming home to find Nora unusually tired. Mom always saying she'd had a big day at the park. I work 60 hours a week. Tears streamed down my face. I haven't bought new shoes in 3 years. I skip lunch most days. Every penny goes to keeping her safe. I laughed, harsh and broken. While you've been delivering her to him like a freaking pizza slice. Mom tried to reach for Nora's hands, but I blocked her. The court said supervised visits only, with a social worker present. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the document. See this? This is what you signed. As a witness, you testified about what he did to me. People deserve second chances. Not with my daughter. My hands shook as I found more evidence. Her teacher said she's been tired on Wednesdays. Unfocused. I blamed myself. I thought I was failing her. The security guard reached us. Ma'am, is everything? Call 911. I didn't look away from my mother. Tell them it's a custody violation. Kidnapping. Child endangerment. Mom's face crumpled. Stephanie, please. I'm your mother. You were. The words came out cold. Final. Nora, remember when we talked about unsafe secrets? The ones that make your tummy hurt? My daughter nodded, tears on her cheeks. It's time to tell those secrets, baby. All of them. Even about the lady there sometimes? Nora whispered. The one who smells like cigarettes? My vision went red. What lady? Daddy's friend. She's mean. She grabbed my arm once. Hard. Grandma said not to tell. I saw my mother's whole body flinch. She knew. She knew there was another woman there, unsupervised with my baby. Grandma said you'd take me away if you found out, Nora whispered. The final piece. She'd coached my 6-year-old to lie to me. Made her carry this weight. This fear. The police arrived as I dialed another number. Yes, I need adult protective services. My mother appears to be showing signs of dementia, taking a child to dangerous situations, unable to comprehend legal documents. Mom's eyes widened in horror as she realized what I was doing. Also, I continued calmly, she may be receiving money from my ex-husband, financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior. As they led my mother away for questioning, she looked back once. I saw her mouth. Please. I turned away. She thought this was the worst moment of her life, but she had no idea what was coming. The officer's hand landed on my shoulder and pulled me back from Mom, while another cop stepped between us. Nora's fingers dug into my shirt as her whole body shook against me. The officer asked if we needed medical attention, and something clicked in my brain. This was my chance to get everything documented the right way. I told him yes, we needed to check if my daughter had been drugged. His face changed immediately, and he called for an ambulance while the other officer led Mom toward the exit. The paramedics arrived within minutes and loaded us into the back while Mom watched from the police car. Nora kept asking if Grandma was in trouble, and her voice sounded so small and confused. I stroked her hair and told her nobody was mad at her. She did the right thing by telling the truth. The paramedic started taking notes when Nora mentioned feeling funny and sleepy after Daddy's special juice. His pen moved faster across the clipboard as she described how her tummy felt weird. The ambulance ride took forever, but also felt like seconds. At the ER, the triage nurse's expression hardened when I explained about the sleepy juice my ex gave Nora. My voice cracked as I laid out the pattern of Tuesday visits and Wednesday symptoms. She marked our case as priority and got us into a room immediately. A different officer showed up to take my full statement while we waited for the doctor. I handed over the custody order showing supervised visits only. He wrote down everything about how Mom claimed they were at the park every Tuesday for 6 months. His notebook filled with details about Nora's anxiety and bedwetting and nightmares that always peaked on Wednesdays. The doctor came in and took Nora for her exam while I stepped into the hallway. My hands shook as I called her therapist's emergency line. I explained what happened and that we needed an urgent session to document everything for court. She scheduled us for the next morning and mentioned she'd need to make a mandatory report. My phone started buzzing with text after text from Mom. Apologies and excuses and claims I was overreacting mixed with threats about destroying our family. I screenshot every single message without responding and created a folder labeled evidence. My hands kept shaking, but I forced myself to stay systematic about it. The doctor brought Nora back and explained they'd run tests, but Benadryl leaves the system quickly. She said Nora's symptoms matched what we described though. That night after we got home, Nora finally fell asleep in my bed after crying for an hour. I sat at the kitchen table and typed an email to her teacher requesting written documentation. I kept the tone professional and just asked for observations about Wednesdays specifically. Every piece of evidence mattered now. I barely slept, and first thing the next morning I called the DV legal clinic. The intake worker said they could see me today if I got there by noon. I called in sick to work knowing I'd lose the day's pay but having no choice. My boss sounded annoyed, but I couldn't explain what was happening. I dropped Nora at the school and drove straight to the clinic. Diego Alvarez met me in a small conference room with papers spread across the table. He laid out our strategy while taking notes notes on everything I told him. We'd file for emergency modification and coordinate with CPS and document everything obsessively. He explained we needed to show a clear pattern and immediate danger to Nora. The retainer would normally be $2,000, but they'd work with me on payments. I signed everything he put in front of me and gave him copies of all my screenshots. He said the texts from Mom were gold because they showed admission of the visits. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a 3-ring binder and dividers. I created sections for medical records and school documentation and therapy notes and photos. Every Tuesday got highlighted in yellow on the calendar pages I printed. Every Wednesday symptom got documented in red. I found receipts from work showing I was there those Tuesday afternoons. Each receipt proved I couldn't have known what was happening. The binder grew thicker as I added printouts of Mom's texts and the custody order. I made copies of Nora's medical records from the ER visit. The doctor's notes about symptoms consistent with antihistamine overdosing went in the medical section. My eyes burned from staring at papers, but I kept going. This binder would be my weapon in court. Every page showed how they betrayed my trust and hurt my baby. I thought about all those Tuesdays when I came home exhausted from work. Mom always said Nora had a big day at the park and needed an early bedtime. I believed her because she was my mother and I trusted her to protect Nora. The rage built in my chest, but I pushed it down and kept organizing papers. Anger wouldn't help in court, but documentation would. By midnight, the binder was 2 inches thick and perfectly organized with labeled tabs. Tomorrow, I'd start gathering more evidence and building our case stronger. The next morning, I dropped Nora at her therapy appointment and watched through the one-way glass as she grabbed the crayons. She drew a red door first, then added a church with bells next to it. The therapist asked what else she remembered about Daddy's house. Nora drew a big mean dog in the yard and colored it black with sharp teeth. There's something really strange about how Mom keeps looking everywhere except at her daughter, the floor, the ceiling, but never making eye contact when she's caught in this huge lie. She added a basement with a TV and drew stick figures watching movies down there. Then she drew a lady with yellow hair who yells a lot. The therapist wrote down every single word Nora said without asking leading questions. She just let Nora talk and draw whatever came to her mind. I took photos of the drawings with my phone for our evidence folder. That weekend, while Nora stayed with my neighbor, I drove to my ex's church and started searching the nearby streets. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I turned down each block looking for a red door. 3 blocks from the church, I spotted his truck parked outside a rundown house. The red door matched Nora's drawing exactly. I recognized the woman on the porch from old Facebook photos my ex had been tagged in. She was smoking a cigarette and had the same bleached blonde hair Nora drew. I parked down the street and pulled out my phone to take pictures. I stayed on the public sidewalk and zoomed in to get the house number clearly. I took photos of his truck's license plate and the red door. I made sure the timestamp showed on every photo. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to be careful and not give him any reason to claim I was stalking or harassing him. I drove away after getting what I needed and went straight home to upload everything to the cloud. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and listened to my ex screaming about how I was poisoning Nora against him. He said I was committing parental alienation and he'd file his own emergency motion. He called me every name in the book and threatened to destroy me in court. I saved the recording immediately and forwarded it to Diego with a note about the threats. My phone rang again an hour later with the APS worker returning my call about Mom. She took detailed notes as I explained how Mom had witnessed my ex's abuse, but still took Nora to him. The worker mentioned they'd investigate if my ex had been paying Mom money. She said financial exploitation of seniors was something they took seriously. She asked for dates and any proof of payments. I told her about Mom's comments about gas money and grocery help. 2 days later, the ER called with Nora's test results. The doctor explained the Benadryl was already out of her system since it had been almost a week since Tuesday, but she said Nora's symptoms I described matched antihistamine overdosing perfectly. She offered to write a letter for court stating that the symptoms were consistent even without positive test results. I thanked her and asked her to email it directly to Diego. That night, after Nora went to bed, I pulled up the 911 recording the police had given me. I transcribed every word into a document and highlighted the important parts. Hearing myself say, "My mother's been taking my daughter to her abusive father," made my stomach turn. But it was proof of what happened that day in the store. I added the transcript to the binder with a timestamp clearly marked. At Nora's second therapy appointment 3 days later, she brought up the sleepy juice without anyone asking. She told the therapist exactly what it tasted like and how it made her feel funny. The therapist explained she'd write a detailed report for court about what Nora disclosed. She said professional documentation from a licensed therapist would carry more weight than just my word alone. She also noted that Nora hadn't been coached because her story stayed consistent without prompting. The next day, CPS called to schedule something called a forensic interview. Amina Farouk introduced herself as the caseworker and explained the whole process. She said trained interviewers would talk to Nora at the Child Advocacy Center while everything got video recorded. They had special protocols to preserve testimony for court. She said I couldn't be in the room, but I could watch on a monitor in another room. She scheduled it for the following week and gave me the address. That same afternoon, I got an email from Nora's teacher with 3 months of observations. She'd gone back through her notes and found a clear pattern of Wednesday problems. She wrote about Nora being exhausted every Wednesday and having trouble focusing on those days. She mentioned occasional fearfulness that seemed to spike midweek. The teacher also noted that since the Tuesday visits stopped, Nora seemed much calmer and more engaged in class. She said she'd testify if needed and attached her professional credentials to the email. I printed everything and added it to the growing pile of evidence. Each piece of documentation made our case stronger and proved I wasn't making this up. The binder kept getting thicker as more professionals confirmed what I'd been seeing. My ex could deny all he wanted, but the evidence was piling up against him. Every document, every recording, every photo showed the truth about what he and Mom had done to my baby. The forensic interview was scheduled for the next week at the Child Advocacy Center downtown. I barely slept the night before, going over every possible question they might ask Nora. We arrived early, and I filled out more paperwork while Nora played with blocks in the waiting area. Priya Nair came out to get her, a woman with kind eyes who explained she'd be talking to Nora alone while I watched from another room. My hands clenched into fists as I sat in front of the monitor, watching my baby walk into that room without me. Priya was gentle, starting with easy questions about school and favorite colors before slowly moving to harder topics. Nora sat cross-legged on the floor, playing with dolls while she talked about Daddy's house. She described the sleepy juice like it was normal, saying it tasted bad but made her feel funny. She mentioned the mean lady who smelled like cigarettes and grabbed her arm that one time. Priya asked careful questions without leading, letting Nora tell things in her own words. The interview lasted 45 minutes that felt like hours. After it ended, the Advocacy Center staff explained what would happen next with our case. They said Nora's testimony was clear and consistent, which would help, but warned that children's words alone rarely win custody cases. They handed me pamphlets about their free counseling services and said we qualified regardless of how the case turned out. That night after Nora went to bed, I opened Facebook on my laptop and started searching. I typed my ex's name and scrolled through months of posts from his church friends. There she was in photo after photo, the woman Nora described with the cigarettes. She was tagged at church picnics, volunteer events, always standing next to him. The timestamps showed she'd been around for at least 6 months, right when the secret visit started. I screenshot everything, making sure the dates and tags were visible. My printer ran out of ink halfway through, so I drove to the office store at 10 p.m. to buy more cartridges. Back home, I printed every single photo and labeled them with sticky notes about why they mattered. Diego had said social media evidence was gold because people forgot to delete old tags. The girlfriend being there during unsupervised visits violated the custody order completely. I organized them chronologically in plastic sleeves, adding them to my growing evidence binder. 2 days later, Mom left another voicemail while I was at work. Her voice sounded broken as she talked about God and forgiveness and how I was breaking her heart. Then she mentioned something about the help my ex gave her with groceries when times were tight. I saved the recording immediately and forwarded it to Diego without listening to the rest. That admission about him paying her was exactly what we needed for the financial exploitation angle. I spent that evening going through 2 years of old text messages from Mom. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I found what I was looking for. Messages from Tuesdays asking for gas money to take Nora to the park. Comments about being short on cash right before the visit started. Diego had already subpoenaed bank records that would show deposits from my ex on those exact dates. The financial trail proved this whole thing was planned, not some grandmother wanting to help. I printed those texts too, highlighting the important parts with yellow marker. Diego called the next morning to say he was filing our emergency motion with everything we'd gathered. Medical reports, therapy notes, teacher observations, photos, financial records, all of it. The court clerk said they could get us on the calendar in 2 weeks. We were asking for suspended visitation and a permanent no-contact order for Mom. Diego warned me to expect my ex to file something in response. 3 days later, I got home from work to find legal papers taped to my door. My ex's counter motion claimed parental alienation and demanded makeup visitation for all the time he'd missed. Reading his lies about me coaching Nora made me want to throw up. He said I was turning her against him and denying his parental rights. Diego told me this was standard tactics and not to worry. The same day, I got a call from the court saying they'd appointed Marek Kowalski as guardian ad litem. He would investigate what was best for Nora and make recommendations to the judge. His assistant scheduled a home visit for the following week. I spent the entire weekend deep cleaning our apartment, scrubbing baseboards, and organizing every closet. I bought new sheets for Nora's bed and made sure all her artwork was displayed on the walls. The place needed to look perfect, even though I knew they weren't really judging my housekeeping. Marek would want to see where Nora lived and interview us separately about everything. After he left, I turned my attention back to the timeline binder that had become my obsession. I bought color-coded tabs and created a master index so anyone could find any piece of evidence instantly. I wonder how she knew exactly which streets to search near the church. Did she remember something Nora said about the distance? The way that red door matched the drawing perfectly makes me think about how kids notice such specific details when they're scared or uncomfortable. Every document got copied 3 times. One set for court, one for Diego, one backup I kept in my car. The binder grew to 3 inches thick, held together with the biggest rings I could find. Each section had its own color: medical in blue, school in green, police reports in red. I spent hours making sure every page was in order, every date clear, every piece of proof exactly where it needed to be. My phone rang the next morning while I was getting Nora ready for school. Amina from CPS had their preliminary recommendation ready after reviewing everything we'd sent over. She explained they were recommending supervised visits only at a designated center for my ex, pending further investigation into the drugging allegations. They also wanted him to complete anger management and parenting classes before any changes could be considered. I wrote down every word she said on the notepad I kept by the phone now, making sure I got the exact wording about the safety concerns they'd identified. It wasn't the complete no-contact order I'd hoped for, but having CPS officially supporting supervised visits only was huge for our case. 2 days later, the APS investigator called about Mom's case. They'd completed their investigation and found her mentally competent, but noted she appeared susceptible to manipulation and that there were clear financial incentives involved in her actions. The investigator said they couldn't force any specific actions since Mom wasn't deemed incapacitated, but their report would become part of our court evidence showing her choices were deliberate, not confused. I asked for a copy of the full report and added the case number to my growing list of documentation. That afternoon, my boss asked me to stay after my shift ended. He sat me down in his office and explained that all the time I'd been missing for court appointments and emergency meetings was becoming a problem for scheduling. I pulled out the folder I'd been carrying with the court documents showing the custody emergency and asked if we could work something out. After 20 minutes of negotiation, we agreed I'd drop to part-time hours with a flexible schedule that would let me handle all the legal stuff. The pay cut meant I'd have to apply for food assistance, but protecting Nora was worth eating ramen for however long this took. My phone buzzed that evening with a text from an unknown number calling me a vindictive bitch who was destroying a good father. The writing style and specific phrases made it obvious this was the girlfriend from my ex's house. I took a screenshot immediately without responding, then blocked the number and forwarded everything to Diego. He texted back within minutes saying this was perfect evidence of harassment and witness intimidation to add to our file. 3 days later, I got home from my shortened shift to find a thick envelope from the court in my mailbox. My hands shook as I opened the interim order. The judge had reviewed our emergency motion and ruled that Mom was barred from any unsupervised contact with Nora, effective immediately. My ex's visits were suspended pending the full hearing scheduled for next month. The order specifically noted serious concerns about child safety based on the evidence presented. I sat on my front steps and cried reading those official words that finally validated everything I'd been saying. The relief lasted about 2 hours before Diego called to warn me that my ex's attorney had sent discovery demands. They wanted wanted 5 years of my medical records, all my work schedules, financial statements, tax returns, basically everything about my life. Diego walked me through what we legally had to provide versus what they were just fishing for. He said this was standard intimidation tactics to try to overwhelm me with paperwork and make me give up. I spent the entire weekend gathering what we actually had to provide while protecting what we didn't. I pulled together all the documentation from Nora's ER visit when we'd checked for drugging, every therapy session note her counselor had shared with me, and got her pediatrician to write a formal letter about the behavioral regression she'd observed. Each piece of professional validation helped chip away at my ex's claims that I was making everything up for parental alienation. The paper trail from actual medical professionals couldn't be argued with the same way my word could be dismissed. Monday morning, I met with Nora's school counselor to discuss additional safety measures. She wrote a supportive letter for our case and helped create a detailed safety plan for Nora at the school. They flagged her file so that absolutely no one except me could pick her up, not even with a note. The school secretary made copies of the court orders to keep on file, and they added a special code word system for any changes to the normal routine. The counselor said they took custody violations extremely seriously after seeing our paperwork and would call police immediately if anyone unauthorized tried to get near Nora. That afternoon, I had a security company come install door alarms on every entrance and cameras covering the front and back of our apartment. I documented every safety measure with photos and receipts for Merrick's investigation, creating detailed pickup protocols that specified exact times and locations for every person authorized to be around Nora. I made laminated cards with emergency contact information for Nora's backpack, my car, and gave copies to 3 trusted neighbors. Every precaution I took would show the court I was the protective parent taking this seriously. The last thing I did that week was dig out Mom's old sworn testimony from my divorce 5 years ago. I went through it page by page with a yellow highlighter, marking every place where she'd testified about my ex's violence toward me. She'd sworn under oath that she'd seen my injuries, that she believed I was in danger, that he needed help for his anger. Her current actions of secretly taking Nora to him directly contradicted every single thing she'd said in that testimony. Diego said this would completely undermine any credibility she might try to claim in court. 3 nights later, my new security camera app sent an alert to my phone at 2:07 a.m., and there it was, my ex's truck creeping down our street with the headlights off. I grabbed my phone and called the police non-emergency line while watching him slow down right in front of our building before driving away. The dispatcher took all the details and gave me an incident number, saying they'd add extra patrols to our area and this would be documented as another custody violation. The next morning, I downloaded a call recording app that Diego recommended, one that automatically backs up to the cloud and announces its recording to stay legal in our state. Every voicemail from my ex or mom got saved to 3 different places now because Diego kept saying we needed bulletproof documentation of any contact attempts. That technology would be our shield against their lies. 2 days later, Merrick showed up for the home visit, and I felt my stomach twist as he walked through our small apartment asking about everything. He wanted to know my exact work schedule, who watched Nora when I wasn't home, what our daily routine looked like, how I managed 60-hour weeks as a single parent. I showed him Nora's room with her drawings taped to every wall, her stuffed animals arranged just how she liked them, the nightlight she picked out shaped like a butterfly. He asked hard questions about my support system, and I had to admit it was mostly just me in the daycare, but I showed him the emergency contact list I'd made with 3 neighbors' numbers and explained how the school had special protocols now. That weekend, I spread out everything on my kitchen table to make the visual timeline Diego wanted for court. I printed photos from my phone showing Nora's bruises from 3 months ago, calendar pages with every Tuesday circled in red, receipts proving I was at work those afternoons. I used sticky notes with neutral language just stating facts, no emotional words, because Diego said judges want clear presentations that don't need interpretation. The following Thursday, I finally went to the DV support group at the community center and sat in a circle with 5 other moms who understood without me having to explain. One woman shared how her ex's parents had violated custody orders for 2 years straight until she learned to document everything properly. She showed me her notebook system where she wrote down observations in real time with exact quotes and times, not trying to remember later when memories get fuzzy. She said keeping a dedicated notebook just for this saved her case because judges trust contemporaneous notes more than typed documents made later. That night, I bought a composition notebook and started writing everything down immediately when it happened. Wednesday morning came, and for the first time since this all started, Nora slept through the whole night without waking up screaming or wetting the bed. I wrote it in my new notebook with the exact time she woke up, what she said at breakfast, how she seemed calmer getting ready for school without that Wednesday anxiety that had become normal. Small victories mattered, and Diego said positive changes after visits stopped would help our case as much as documenting the bad stuff. That afternoon, Diego called to warn me that my ex's attorney had subpoenaed Nora's therapy records, but he'd already filed a motion to limit what they could see. We got it narrowed down to only dates relevant to the custody case, protecting most of her private sessions from their fishing expedition. Every boundary we maintained mattered because they were trying to find anything to use against me. A week later, the visitation center sent over their logs, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. My ex had missed 2 of his scheduled supervised visits after the judge ordered them, just didn't show up even though he was fighting so hard for access. What's Mom's real game here, testifying against her own daughter after swearing under oath about the violence 5 years ago? Something doesn't add up with her sudden change of heart and these financial incentives the investigator mentioned. Diego said this was gold for our case because judges really notice when parents claim they desperately want to see their kids, but then don't follow through when given the chance. The next day, Diego had me come to his office for mock cross-examination to prepare for what their attorney would throw at me. He grilled me about my work schedule, asking why I thought I could be a good mother working 60 hours a week, attacking my status as a single parent, trying to make me defensive about not having family support. We practiced staying calm and factual no matter how personal the attacks got, answering only what was asked without volunteering extra information that could be twisted. He taught me to pause before answering, to ask for clarification if a question was confusing, to never argue with the attorney but just state facts. After 3 hours of practice, I felt more prepared than panicked, knowing what to expect instead of walking in blind. That Friday afternoon, Diego forwarded me an email from my ex's attorney floating a settlement offer that made my blood boil. They wanted me to restore Mom's unsupervised access to Nora if I dropped the APS CPS complaint against her, basically using my daughter's safety as a bargaining chip. Diego and I took exactly 5 minutes to discuss it before sending back a firm refusal because Nora's safety would never be negotiable, not for any deal they could offer. Their desperation to make this go away just showed we had a strong case and they knew it. 2 weeks before the hearing, Amina called from CPS to explain their final recommendation, and I could feel my stomach drop as she talked about therapeutic services instead of real punishment. She said they wanted supervised visits to eventually resume with safeguards in place, which wasn't what I wanted to hear, but Diego reminded me this was realistic given how family courts work. The morning of the hearing arrived and I threw up twice before leaving the apartment, my hands shaking so bad I could barely button my court outfit. Walking into that courtroom felt like walking into battle, every piece of evidence in my binder weighing 1,000 pounds. Judge Harrison sat behind the bench reviewing our thick file, her face giving nothing away as she flipped through page after page of documentation. She started asking pointed questions about timelines, about when I first discovered the visits, about what steps I'd taken to protect Nora. Her no-nonsense approach made me sit up straighter, hoping this meant she'd take this seriously instead of just pushing for reconciliation like so many judges do. The first witness was Nora's teacher calling in via phone, her voice clear as she described the Wednesday patterns she'd documented over months. She told the court about Nora being exhausted every Wednesday, unable to focus, sometimes putting her head down on her desk by lunchtime. The judge took notes as the teacher mentioned how Nora had recently said she didn't have to keep secrets anymore, how the child seemed lighter since the visits stopped. Next came Priya from the Advocacy Center, taking the stand to explain the forensic interview process and what Nora had disclosed. She carefully described how Nora talked about the sleepy juice in a matter-of-fact way, not like a child making up stories, but like someone describing routine events. Priya explained this suggested repeated experience rather than coaching, that children who are coached tend to give rehearsed answers while Nora's responses were spontaneous and consistent. Then Mom took the stand and I had to dig my nails into my palms to keep from screaming as she admitted to some Tuesday visits but claimed she stayed the whole time. Diego's cross-examination was brutal, asking her about the cigarette woman, about the financial deposits, watching her contradict herself with every answer. She couldn't explain why she'd accepted money from my ex, couldn't explain why she never mentioned these visits to me, couldn't explain why Nora described being alone with her father. Her credibility crumbled right there in front of everyone, her lies catching up to her as Diego presented bank records showing regular Tuesday deposits. My ex took his turn claiming the Benadryl was just for allergies, waving around church attendance certificates like they erased what he'd done to me and Nora. But when Diego asked about the supervised visits he'd missed, he started deflecting and blaming me for keeping Nora from him. His anger showed through that fake Christian act when Diego pointed out he'd missed 2 scheduled visits after fighting so hard for access. The visitation supervisor testified next, explaining how my ex seemed more interested in arguing about the rules than actually seeing Nora during their sessions. She described him complaining about having to stay in the observation room, demanding to take Nora to the park, getting angry when told no. The logs showed his pattern clearly, missing appointments then blaming the center's schedule, claiming he wanted more time while not showing up for the time he had. Judge Harrison finally called for a recess to review everything, and those 20 minutes felt like 20 years as I sat in the hallway trying not to throw up again. When we went back in, she delivered her ruling in a firm voice that left no room for argument. My ex would get supervised visits only after completing both parenting classes and anger management, with proof of completion required before any visits could resume. Mom was permanently barred from any unsupervised contact with Nora, not even phone calls without me present. The cigarette woman couldn't be present during any visits at all, supervised or not. The judge scheduled a review hearing for 6 months out to check compliance with all requirements. Then came the financial blow when she denied my request for attorney fees, saying both parties would bear their own costs despite the clear violations. Diego had warned me this might happen, but it still hurt knowing I'd be paying off this legal bill for years while my ex got away with just having to take some classes. I accepted the mixed victory because at least Nora was protected, even if justice wasn't complete. 3 days later, a letter arrived from APS saying they were closing their investigation with concerns noted but no formal finding against Mom. I made copies of their report anyway, adding it to my permanent file because every piece of paper trail might matter if Mom tried anything else later. 2 days later, Mom's text popped up on my phone while I was making Nora's lunch. She wrote that she understood she was wrong and wanted to talk about making things right. My fingers typed back that any contact would need to happen through family therapy with a counselor I picked and paid for. She sent 3 more messages saying that seemed extreme, but I deleted them without reading past the preview. The next morning, I sat across from my boss's desk with my hands folded tight in my lap. She looked over my request for reduced hours and a modified schedule that would let me pick up Nora from the school every day. The pay cut would hurt, but she approved it after I explained the custody situation without going into too much detail. That afternoon, I filled out the online forms for food assistance while Nora colored at the kitchen table. My pride burned as I typed our income information, but I kept going through each screen. The utility assistance application came next, and I forced myself to check every box we qualified for. 3 weeks passed before I realized Nora had made it through Wednesday without wetting the bed or having a meltdown. She came home from the school talking about her art project and asking for a snack like any normal kid. I drove us to the ice cream shop and let her get 2 scoops even though we usually stuck to 1. She picked chocolate and strawberry and got it all over her face while telling me about recess. We didn't make a big deal about the milestone, but I marked it in my notebook that night. The next Saturday, I was comparing prices on pasta sauce when someone called my name at the grocery store. My ex's old friend from work stood there with his cart blocking mine. He started talking about how people make mistakes and everyone deserves forgiveness. I pulled out my phone and started recording while he kept going about how my ex had changed and wanted to work things out. He said I was being too hard on a good man who just lost his temper sometimes. I told him to move his cart and walked away while he called after me about giving peace a chance. That night, I typed up everything he said and emailed it to Diego with a video attached just in case it counted as contempt. The DV support group met every Thursday in the basement of a church downtown. I sat in the circle of metal chairs listening to other women share their stories that sounded so much like mine. One woman who'd been coming for 2 years taught me about something called trauma-informed parenting. She showed me how to help Nora feel safe through routines and clear expectations instead of just hoping things would get better. Another woman gave me a workbook she'd already finished that had exercises for helping kids process scary experiences. I started going every week and found myself looking forward to being around people who understood without me having to explain. Late at night after Nora was asleep, I searched apartment listings in better school districts on my phone. The rents were higher, but I calculated how much I could save by cutting everything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I bookmarked places near good elementary schools and started putting every extra dollar in an envelope marked moving fund that I hid behind the cleaning supplies. Some nights I only added $2 from returning cans, but it was something. Every Sunday I updated my documentation binder with a week's notes and observations. I wrote down that Nora had started sleeping through the night more often and wasn't flinching when people moved too fast near her. How did Diego know exactly what questions the other lawyer would ask during practice? The way he prepared her for those personal attacks about being a single mom working long hours makes me wonder if he's seen this exact pattern before with cases like this. Her teacher sent home a note saying she was participating more in class and seemed less anxious during group work. I photocopied everything and put the originals in the binder with dated tabs. 6 months after the hearing, I had 3 full binders organized by category. The review hearing was coming up in 2 weeks, and I spent hours checking that every single paper was in order. I practiced what I would say if the judge asked me questions and made backup copies of the most important documents. My phone had hundreds of photos showing Nora's progress, like her artwork getting less dark and angry over time. Tonight, Nora fell asleep in her own bed, clutching the stuffed elephant we'd gotten at a yard sale last month. I stood in her doorway for a minute, watching her breathe steady and calm without any nightmares pulling her under. Then I walked through the apartment, checking that the deadbolt was turned and the chain was on. The kitchen window lock was loose again, so I wedged a wooden spoon in the track like the woman from group had taught me. I sat at the kitchen table with tomorrow's schedule written out in front of me. School pickup at 3, homework time, dinner, bath, story, bed by 8. The same routine we'd been following for months now because predictable meant safe in Nora's world. My phone buzzed with another text from Mom, but I turned it face down without looking. Everything important would go through lawyers or therapists from now on. The documentation binder sat open to tomorrow's page, ready for whatever needed to be recorded. We weren't completely healed and might never be, but we were safe and stable and moving forward one documented day at a time. Thanks for hanging out and digging into all these little details with me today. It's been a fun ride exploring everything together. I'll see you around. Subscribe for more content like this.